Hello, good afternoon to you all. Today, we have a new meeting of thinking about possible futures in BIENALSUR. It will have somehow different characteristics from previous editions because here we will feature the documentary called The Walkers towards the sacred city of the Quilmes. This was a project that was part of BIENALSUR 2019 with Katsushiko Ibino, the great Japanese artist who has taken part in other BIENALSUR meetings as well, and of whom we created a documentary, the one we will be featuring today. This will be followed by a discussion with the participation of Alejandra Misraji, a Tucuman artist and curator, Liliana Soto and Orlando Garcia, teachers at El Bañado and Amaicha del Valle in Tucumán, the schools that took part in this project. And it will be very interesting to listen to what they will have to say about the meaning of Turn's project in Tucumán and what it meant for the ancestral communities in Tucumán, the Quilmes communities. From BIENALSUR, we are interested not only in developing projects, art projects and exhibitions that are so well known by all of you as the closest identity of BIENALSUR, not just carry forward public programs that gave us life from the startup in the first edition. You might remember that we started with Global South meetings in November 2015, and ever since we kept searching for ways to introduce reflections on the contemporary experience from the perspective of art and culture. But we are also interested, and this was one of the startup premises, to render visible some of the processes that are undertaken from contemporary art. And in this case, the documentary comes along to unveil or to reflect such processes and such community efforts, something that assumes some sort of expanded perspective of the perspective of contemporary art understood in a more conventional manner. In turn, this is the first documentary of the second cycle because BIENALSUR has been developing documentaries. You may have watched them on public TV. If you're in Colombia, this might have been featured at France 24, the Colombian TV. In Brazil, it also was featured, but I'm sure you may have watched it or you may watch it on BIENALSUR's YouTube channel or on our webpage where these documentaries are hosted. So this is another way to get in touch with BIENALSUR through documentaries and the processes that involve artists and communities in connection with each and every one of the projects. Working with earth to make pottery is something that is done all over the world. It is also done in Japan, as well as in Tucumán, Quilmes, and certainly also in Argentina. Life of people is in and of itself short, but life of nature remains unchanging for a long time. I get the feeling that I see exactly the same surroundings that the Quilmes saw at their time. It is with this feeling in mind that we went off to Quilmes.
Create a community of the photographers here that will give into the children the wise vision of the photography.
Lo bonito del proceso es ver cómo cada artista va generando sus ideas.
La idea de instalar un seguidor que señala a todos desde arriba es esta idea de quién fue.
Siempre utilicé mi experiencia cotidiana más que la historia del arte para construir mi trabajo.
d'avoir peur de disparaître. C'est le début de la vie en même temps. Parce que disparaître, c'est aussi naître.
Como artista, estamos voltados de reflectir problemas.
La construction misma del tiempo es una ficción.
Je cherche à installer de grandes trompettes qui, quand il y a du vent, représentent un peu le cri de la baleine.
それを受け入れる人の関係性ができた時にアートっていうのは成り立つのかなとは思うので。
La magia no aparece en cualquier momento. La magia llega si la sabes esperar. Y yo espero, como un cazador, a que eso suceda.
Art is part of the life.
We will now go from the capital city of Tucumán to the sacred city of Quilmes. On the way, we want to gather earth and also herbs. With the earth, we will make clays. This is how it goes. We arrived from Japan to Buenos Aires by plane, shortly before setting off to Tucumán. We visited the town of Quilmes. This name is after the native people who ended up settling in this area. When we were in Buenos Aires, in that area, we asked people if they were familiar with the history of the Quilmes people, but they didn't have much of a clue. Then we considered that we went the reverse journey that they took from Buenos Aires to Tucumán. That is to say, part of the process of reinitiating the path that the Quilmes people did on foot. The native Indian. We also heard that it takes cactuses a long time to grow, so we thought that the Quilmes were seeing a similar landscape to this one.
Patico. Patricio. Nombre? Santiago.
The purpose of Turn Project is to give a new face, a new facet to changes in society.
¿Quién quiere marcar Japón?
The most important thing is cooperation between artists and the community where they work. Well, firstly, in the city that is called San Miguel de Tucumán, the BIENALSUR exhibition will be opened. In this context, in 2 primary schools in Quilmes, adjacent to Tucumán, the Secretariat of BIENALSUR created for us a possibility to exchange art between turn project and schools. We asked what activities were carried out by these 2 schools to create native art. And we learned that every day in one of the schools they worked with earth and with pieces of pots that were found in the ruins. We also learned that on the other school, they devoted a lesson to a traditional weaving technique, as can be seen by the ornament I'm wearing. Based on this, I chose Japanese artists that would work with pottery and with weaving.
Este tela es de Japón. Este tela de Argentina. Abanico es cultiva.
Muy bien.
¿Verdad? Sí. Hay un chico, ¿no? ¿Cómo? Ella lo que quiere es que nosotros unamos todo, entonces va a ser una unión dentro de la obra. ¿Entendés? O sea, cuando nosotros la terminemos, nos vamos a unir ahí.
Bueno, primero se la pone en un recipiente, se disuelve todo, se mezcla y con agua, donde se sacan las impurezas que se levantan y luego se hace el vaciado en una pileta de contrapiso, ¿no? Entonces ahí se la deja que se insuma el agua y bueno, para la tarde ya se va a levantar la capa, se asienta la arena y se escurre el agua y al otro día uno puede levantar los mosaicos eso para volverlo a humedecer, agregar un poco de agua para ya empezar a amasar. Estamos por preparar la piletita así en el contrapiso de una de las aulas que está en construcción, cosa que ya para el lunes esté todo listo, solo habría que ir a recolectar, ¿no? Quedaría así.
On Monday? Is it easy to build?
Es el primer día y ahí ya empieza, ya se puede levantar. Sí. Y acá se queda el arcilla, se asienta y se va partiendo así. Ahí participamos con los chicos también, que nos ayuden. Bueno, lunes podemos hacer, el lunes, el 10, una parte y después ya en estos días. Según la cantidad de piezas que tengamos, pero no necesitamos muchas tampoco para experimentar, para hacer la experiencia.
Yeah.
はい、今日
Yes, today we visited 2 schools. The first school we visited is school number 217 and the second one 213. Both are very distinct and different. But they both have something in common in relation to the turn project that will be conducted. They know and they feel proud of the history of their people, and they educate their students on these notions, and they also teach them how to make native crafts. This knowledge heritage passed on to future generations also generates high hopes in us when it comes to the turn project. I would say that this is a place where you get the feeling to be surrounded by mountains all around, just as can be seen behind me. Wind also blows quite strong. There is a river, but it doesn't carry any water. All this makes me feel as though I was in a place that planet Earth decided to preserve in its original form. Here I do have the feeling that I am in a place where I see Earth in its original form. This is clay. The ones on bags are humid and these are dry. We collected them with Yago at the San Martín de Quilmes Square, at Choral, El Indio, Tafí del Valle, El Infernillo, and Maite. These here are from Santa Maria, from El Camino, from Potrero de la Irma, from the Canes, and Talapaso. We also collected from Anjuana this one that looks green. Kids also helped. They brought earth from the hill. They brought it as special earth that is used for making cooking pots, just like this one. Our predecessors made cooking pots with this earth. There still are people who make them. All these clays have been mixed into one single mud on that side, and it symbolizes the path that Quilmes took when they were forced out of their land. Earth is something that outlives the life of plants and animals. We believe that Earth will surely carry with it the memories of ancient civilizations. This is also what we want to communicate to school children, so that, with this feeling in mind, they set off to work with their hands to create art all together. I think that while you work on something like this, it is important to get familiar with its history and with the feelings that protagonists had there and then. In Quilmes, they have a weaving technique, and in Japan there is also another one, which is the one that we brought to share this time. It is called sakiori. It consists of unraveling clothing items that are no longer in use, so that fine pieces will be created, so that they are used as part of the weaving. It is a way of recycling. This technique stems from a Japanese tradition that goes a long way back. In poor regions, people could not afford new fabrics, so they unraveled old clothing items and they would weave them back, creating a new piece. This is the technique that Mai has studied. She is originally specialized in weaving. She therefore also studied sakiori. On the other hand, There is the shape of the Japanese fan, which in the old days, it used to be an item where paper would be stuck on top of the frame and the resulting piece would be used to ventilate. There is another old item that looks similar to it in shape, one that the general would use in battles. He would use it to rally its subordinates, and it is known as gunbai. It was used to command the battle, this being similar to the traditional fan. We brought them as a symbol to connect the feeling of the Quilmes people who stood up in battle till the last minute. Since I got here, I learned a lot from children and from old people. Since then, with our colleagues, we have always thought to integrate them when teaching children at the school. So, when people had some sort of skill or experience, we invited them to take part in classes and to teach children what they know how to do. This has been the case for a long time. Since we started back in the 90s, we've been promoting this activity where the knowledge of people gets shared at the school, this being part of our curriculum. We would organize workshops once a week so that craftsmen and parents would be able to teach children at the school. Today, teachers have already learned how this is done, and it has become an institutional workshop. It is not only under my area, but rather under the school as a whole. We have two workshops, School Museum and the workshop on pottery. Most of them do agriculture. They live on what they grow. They all have different possibilities. They may raise an animal, they may have a vegetable garden. Maybe they don't have any money, but they do have the daily food intake they need to have in order to survive. Children come to the school from different locations, Amaicha, Santa Maria or Cafayate. Their daily life is quite different because they belong to underprivileged families and they don't have any money of their own to make ends meet. They always depend on getting a job. Chogo is very willing to work with children and with everybody in general. We have developed several cultures in connection with the exile of the Quilmes, the path they made from Quilmes here. Children have shaped human figures. They also made self-portraits and they created objects trying to represent how the Quilmes left and how they carried with them their animals and personal belongings. We fully understood the meaning and we consider that Yogo's attitude is very important in showing an appreciation for the Quilmes people, because even today we still find it hard to preserve the space we have, because there still are disputes over the land. So talking about the exile of the Quilmes is really very important for us.
Ahí lo voy pasando al hilo. También se puede tejer más fino.
I pass through the thread, and you can also weave it in a finer manner. We have two projects for these workshops. Today, we also met the native craftsmen. I thought they would be 2 or 3 of them, or maybe between 5 and 6, but I got surprised because there were around 30 of them, quite a lot. These included people who work with pottery and with weaving, with wood carving, and with metals. There is a strong sense of exchange in all this. On the other hand, those who will be creating a piece are children, so that techniques need to be adapted. These children are between 6 and 12 years old. Each one of them will leave their own impression and their own unique traits. Out of all these exchanges with Ciudad Sagrada de Quilmes, something new will surely arise. It will surely be a bit different from what we planned back when we were in Japan. I'm quite excited. I do want to get back to them in a reciprocal manner so that the Turn project will meet their expectations. I'd also like for the Turn project to be a catalyst to create some change here in Amaicha and in Ciudad Sagrada de Quilmes. It would be nice that faced with the changes that this region will undergo in the coming generations, to find out that the Turn project was somehow involved. Having this exchange with the Japanese culture, and since in this region there are many craftsmen who don't often have the time to meet, they now are all gathering around the Turn project. I firmly believe that when different people get together, something new is created. We have come from abroad, and they come from different locations in the area, and we all meet in one single space. I think it is a chance to show the beginning of a new era. What we did on Monday was to bring the pieces that we had presented at the National Museum in Tucumán. We brought them here to show them at the Quilmes ruins. It would be like saying that that which was made in Quilmes goes back to Quilmes. The special feature of this museum is that it stands right on top of the Quilmes ruins. Sculptures have to be laid out in such a way as to represent those who walked, but this time back to the ruins in Quilmes. It's an opportunity for those children who made these pieces to have a chance to see how their pieces are exhibited, since they didn't have a chance to go downtown. Earth also makes the person. For this reason, I believe that this will be a good opportunity, one for people to understand the history of the Quilmes people. They represent the return of the walkers to the mountain. A long time ago, they left these lands off to Buenos Aires, and today they have returned. In Japan, we have a saying that goes that in the end, human beings will return to Earth. In all this, we also included that philosophy that says that human beings, when they die, they cease to be flesh and bones, and they go back to Earth. Hello. Hello to you all. We are here with Diana Wexler. I'm Aníbal Hossami. I'm the director of BIENALSUR. Diana Wexler is the artistic and academic director of BIENALSUR. And we are here with Alejandra Mihraji. She's an artist and a curator from Tucumán. She currently is based in Tucumán. And with two teachers from El Bañado and Amaicha del Valle, who have taken part. They had a very active and remarkable participation together with us in the experience meant by the Turn project in Tucumán. I mean, the documentary that you have just watched. Diana? Well, the dynamic for this part of the meeting has been thought of so that we can engage in a conversation based on the experience after 1 year. The documentary was put together based on the experience, the local experience, and some sort of spontaneous testimony gathering. So 1 year after that experience, we felt like engaging in a conversation with each and every one of you, what your memories are and what was left as a result of such an experience. To what an extent did it represent an impact in your communities? What kind of an impact did it have on children? To what an extent was it useful to recover traditions or in order to reinforce traditions? Many times these actions were perspectives, cultural perspectives that are distant, such as that of Japan and the local community get together. They render visible strengths that just because you have them and just because you don't face them, then you don't recognize them. So please, let's talk about this. I don't know who is supposed to go first. I mean, for us, it's been very significant because it's been a major effort and it's been a month where we worked and we managed to get the participation of the entire school. Children from all ages up to secondary school, plus neighbors and craftsmen that have always provided their support for school activities. We've been working with this project on pottery for a long time. Since I joined the school, that is in 1997, and even from before in another school where I joined in 1990, So we have had a lot of wealth. There's lots of remains that we have from our predecessors, and we found some pieces in the plot of land, and we wanted to increase the value of those items, to give it the right place so that families would be integrated. And this project helped us reinforce the idea of community participation. And we managed to give importance to pottery, to recover the value and to push it forward as a result of BIENALSUR and the Turn project. So it's been quite remarkable. Lots of people took an interest in it. They saw it and they've given it a high appreciation. And as a result of this, we managed to get this exclusive space supported by the Ministry of Education, the museum, and other projects created by children and by community members. So it's been something that has reinforced a lot this new value given to the culture of our predecessors. In Amaicha del Valle, we also worked a lot. We live in different locations, and the project has brought us together. Even though we live next to one another, we are neighbors, we focus on our own communities when it comes to working. So this experience was wonderful. First, because it brought us together, because it helped us meet. We kept having reciprocity from that moment on in communicating these knowledges. And it was very important because we had been working in a project under the House of Memory in order to start getting to work in textile memory. In Amaicha, unlike in Quilmes, in the school, there is no knowledge management. Why not? Because when those teachers who have these skills retire, no one fills in for them. Well, the weavers that would teach weaving have retired, and we have no one to fill in for them and to teach weaving. So whatever is done actually is done at the backyards of houses. And the project was very useful in order for us to get together, to come close to one another, to see the need to get together and have a space such as the House of Memory to keep rescuing or recovering the value of these techniques. People do it at their backyards, but it's nice to have a place of memory where history is narrated with our own voices, getting together, exchanging among women, all these things is really important. And of course, we keep resisting from our own place. Yes, well, before, let me make a clarification remark, because this will be watched from all over the world. We are talking about a project that was conducted in the province of Tucumán, one of the provinces of the northwest of Argentina, with the Quilmes community, the community, the traditional community that has always existed, I mean, for centuries on end in that location. And this is a token of how art, when thought in the terms of BIENALSUR and with the shapes BIENALSUR considers it, may have consequences. These consequences, of course, we aim at having that can be outside or above and beyond the traditional appreciation of art. And this may create highly positive phenomena among the populations who feel interpreted or part and parcel of all this. Alejandra. Well, I wanted to bring light to an idea that I've always thought very interesting from the Turn project and with the Amaicha community in Quilmes, working from a historical perspective, working with history based on these craft processes. This put on the table, under the table of discussion, the historical perspective of the Quilmes community, how these people had lots of challenges in their history. So the months we worked there, whenever we would do things, whether weaving or baking pottery, of course, what was put us at stake was the historical perspective. I spoke with children at school, with teachers, and with craftsmen and women. We talked about the history behind the people and the techniques that are sometimes challenged. They exist elsewhere in the world with some variables when it comes to technical specifications that may be different, but the project brought us together as though the distances between Japan and Argentina were not all that big. So the historical issue, the historical perspective was quite a revelation. I mean, working with history. Yes, along those lines, whatever we do in BIENALSUR projects has a lot to do with processes. And of course, I mean, progress is made one step at a time. On the one hand, this historical dimension, it was part of the whole preparation for the proposal. And even when it came to deciding where to work, what communities to work with, of course, all those things were took into consideration. And it's interesting to find the place that history had in developing the project, not just in connection to the aspect that you were commenting, the history behind techniques, or as Liliana was saying, the memory of doing and how these projects reinvigorate this memory and they recover the need so that even though the weaver teacher may have retired, we keep needing some person that will fill in for her. We need to retain that knowledge as part of the cultural identity of community, but also in terms of what is represented by the coming together of cultures. And in my case, I was quite remarkably well surprised by the impact that the history of Quilmes, of the Quilmes people had in the period of the conquest and the subjection that the Spaniards did to the Quilmes community, and the impact that this had on the Japanese artists when they carried forward this project without any prior notice. And I say this because it is quite an anecdote. Upon arriving in Buenos Aires, they had to take the flight from Tokyo to Buenos Aires and then from Ezeiza to connect another flight to go to Tucumán. They asked to go to Quilmes in the province of Buenos Aires to gather earth from there. And they went down the way picking earth on the journey, and that symbolically reinstated the memory of that exile of the Quilmes outside from their own territory. And in the horizon of the narrative by the Japanese, this is the idea of a return. It is a symbolic return because, as we said a while ago with Liliana, the Quilmes, I mean, even though they were kicked out of their land, they kept resisting, and there is the sacred town, the sacred city, it remains, and you are still there remembering those spaces and honoring that memory. Along those lines of reflection, another episode happened that was quite remarkable for me. On the last day, we were there with children and we went up the hill with the walkers. That was part of the material results, and I'd like for you to talk about this. We were integrating people, all children from different ages and schools and places at the foothill of Sacred City. And in these groups, we asked them to choose a name so that the group would have their own identity. And the names they would pick had to do with the community names. I mean, They didn't choose any names from other cultural worlds, but from the region in and of itself. So the strength of identity that you build on your day-to-day efforts, and this is of course built at the households, at the core of families, is far stronger than we could have assumed. Isn't that right? But of course, you might add far more. I mean, this is my own perception from an outsider point of view. Yes, after a long time, as we were saying before, this experience with the Japanese artists and this collective effort that is useful in order to render visible the heritage and the culture of the Tucuman communities. There are 18 native people communities. This is useful, and it shows that all this oblivion was given new light to. It was rendered visible, and identity and history is very well alive. And memory is not less powerful than oblivion. So it is really important to keep working with children, because once you've been there, you saw how groups were created. The feeling, the main feeling was thinking about the predecessors, those that were there, those that used to be there, and those that will come in the future. And that served that purpose. We were talking with Orlando at some point. I'm sorry about the confusion of the name, on the tradition of Pachamama, Mother Earth. And we wondered to what an extent could the rituals meet this new practice, shaping up the walkers, these human figures in pottery with different techniques, as was tested in these meetings, in these workshops. And the result of these were unique models that children would show quite proudly so. There was one kid in particular that created more than one, and of course they had quite an identity. He was quite a character, and his pieces reflected his personality. Yes, they were quite well identified with the work. There was one kid in particular that kept doing figures one after the other, and he worked a lot. And everyone actually participated, even children, even teachers, sorry. Sometimes it is difficult to get the buy-in of teachers, but we managed to get their involvement. So it's a matter of sharing these ancestral techniques with those from Japan and, of course, from our side. And it was important. It was quite calling for neighbors. We had, of course, the kilns with the fires, and we were baking thins in a different way, and they got quite enthused with this. And, well, of course, on top of that, we had the exhibition in Tucumán, and then in Ciudad Sagrada, in Sacred City, and then there was one in Japan as a result of this meeting. Lots of people took part in Sacred City. It was quite an effort for us distributing material or getting things ready, because we prepared lots of clay to take there. At some point, we were running out of stock, and we had to recycle some that had remained, so that everyone would have material available to them in order to be able to work. So that was quite an important moment, as has always been the case whenever we worked with BIENALSUR and Turn. I think it will be quite a remarkable memory for children, for boys and girls who took part, and it will put them to think permanently on that which they have to think about, how their identity should have to be and how they have to reinforce their identity. And this is the purpose that we had when we talked about the Turn project with Ibino, doing this in Tucumán, as we had done in other prior editions of BIENALSUR in other locations. So it is quite important that you are there and are part of that community to take the role to encourage the memories of this. And I'm sure we'll be able to repeat it at some other point in time in a different way, because this is a constant theme in BIENALSUR, having a social purpose and finding paths so that art will be put to the use of communities, and how art can contribute to identity and integration and the survival of many communities that may not have fallen into oblivion, because, as Liliana said, oblivion might be strong, but attempts so as not to fall into oblivion may even be stronger. And this has to do with keeping diversity and keeping up identities. This has to do with our region, with Argentina and with South America. And that is clearly so one of our goals. There is a dimension that had to do with you, Alejandra. We talked a lot about pottery, that was quite strong, but there was also a textile dimension. And since that is Alejandra's stronghold, I wanted you to talk about that. Well, I was listening to you attentively. I will talk about the textile thing, but before, I wanted to make another comment that has to do with the project's characteristics, which I believe has been successful because it has been available for all. Reciprocity, the possibility put forward by the project of creating reciprocity, how we all felt protagonists in the project. And since we are talking about anecdotes, I would like to say that Yoko thought about walkers as human beings, human figures that would reincarnate in Tucumán and then in Sacred City. But children have also intervened on that installation with animals, with vessels, with pots. They thought about the walk and the walkers well beyond people, understanding the environment well beyond the human domain. And that's quite moving. It is deeply moving to see how animals were represented. Some only focused on representing animals, or food as well, vegetables, how plants would be grown in the area. And in connection to working on textiles, something similar happened. Mai brought along some pieces of fabric with her in order to create the fans from Japan, but that got it became stronger when we worked with the local fibers and with the local dyes in the area. Mai got fascinated. She was mesmerized at that. We taught her a lot about this, and the ladies in Amaicha taught her a lot about that. We took walks to nature to extract those materials in order to dye the fibers, and all the weavers and the students at the Quilmes school would also generate their own narrative on these fans. Sometimes they would talk about figurative ideas, and others they would say, well, this is the wool that I got from the sheep at home. Or, I mean, reciprocity has been there. It's been a project where people had the capacity to listen to one another and to the surrounding context. And along these lines, this was really very important for all participants, to be able to feel part and parcel of the project and true authors of the project. I wanted to add a comment regarding textiles and our experience, and it also has to do with pottery and how we can find in communities the concept of the world, not just the concept or conception of human beings, but about nature. the living of native people in contact with Mother Earth, hence animals and hence walkers and the different crops and whatever could be done. I thought that the collective effort was really very beautiful. Whatever was learned was interesting. We exchanged different materials with Mai. She brought along with her her own techniques, her recycling materials, and how from such diverse places and from such different cultures, it's interesting to see we had a point in common, recycling things to preserve and to take care of the environment, to preserve Mother Earth. And we always work with earth, with pottery, with natural fibers, with natural dyes. So the connection, the point of confluence was maybe in a symbolic perspective, the fan and intertwined with this mesh and the wicker in, the fans. Weavers are very familiar with this element, all that was meant by the fans and the frames. And so kind of we were part of the same fabric, and it was a very enriching experience. So was it for us as well, because we mentioned that the project went far beyond techniques, and it had to do with identities and with memory. Without a doubt, that's true. I mean, I truly believe it is an excellent summary of the two perspectives that were put to work in the project in terms of materials and techniques, and of course the place of history and memory in the project and the coming together of cultures. Animal. Well, I was about to say what you were just saying, the fabric, the meeting, and the memory, as Liliana talked. These are key elements of our work and in our BIENALSUR project. So I believe that on this note, we can conclude this discussion. Of course, we will keep discussing about these notions. And I think we should thank those that watched the documentary and that have listened to this discussion. And no matter if you are from different places around the world, I should say that in many places around the world, we find oblivion situations where ancestral communities fall into oblivion. So this might be quite local, but at the same time, it is quite global. And this is one of the features in art, to be featured by art and by culture in general. Thank you for having participated. Thank you so much, Alejandra, Liliana, and Orlando. Thank you for inviting us. Thank you. On the contrary, thank you for taking us into consideration, and we will keep